Hashtag the Alpha threat. The communication array aboard the Earth Defense Station Horizon crackled to life at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Commander Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes and leaned forward in her chair, watching the incoming transmission decode across her holographic display. What she saw made her blood run cold. The message was simple, direct, and terrifying in its arrogance. Primitive species of Sol 3, you are now subjects of the Kethran hegemony. Submit immediately or face extinction. You have 72 of your rotations to comply. The transmission ended with coordinates and what appeared to be a demonstration of power. A nearby asteroid field, one that human miners had been working for the past 6 months, simply vanished. Not destroyed, not shattered, vanished. As if it had never existed at all. Sarah's hands trembled as she forwarded the message to Earth Command. Within minutes, emergency sessions were called in every major government on Earth. The United Earth Council, formed just 5 years earlier to handle exactly this type of scenario, activated Protocol 7, First Contact with Hostile Intent. Dr. Marcus Webb, Earth's leading xenobiologist and military strategist, stood before the assembled council 12 hours later. The man who had spent his entire career preparing humanity for this moment looked older than his 53 years as he addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing with what appears to be a technologically superior species that calls itself the Kethran hegemony, Webb began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected a fleet of approximately 200 vessels entering our solar system. They're moving at sublight speeds, but their technology appears to be centuries ahead of our own. President Elena Vasquez of the Earth Council leaned forward. What do we know about their capabilities, Doctor? Webb pulled up a holographic display showing the alien fleet. The ships were massive, each one easily the size of a small city. Their hulls seemed to absorb light, making them appear as dark wounds against the star-filled void. Based on our observations, they possess matter manipulation technology that we can barely comprehend. They literally deleted that asteroid field from existence. Our best scientists believe they can manipulate matter at the quantum level, essentially rewriting reality in small patches of space. The room fell silent. General Patricia Hassan, commander of Earth's combined military forces, finally spoke. What are our options, Doctor? Webb's expression was grim. Conventionally speaking? We have none. Our most advanced warships would be like throwing stones at tanks. However, I believe the Kethrans have made a critical error in judgment. What kind of error? Asked President Vasquez. They've given us time, Webb replied. 72 hours. They're so confident in their superiority that they're allowing us to surrender gracefully rather than simply conquering us immediately. That tells me 2 things. First, they prefer subjugation to genocide, which means they need us alive for something. Second, and, more importantly, they don't understand humanity. Dr. Lisa Park, Earth's chief military engineer, stood up from her seat in the back of the room. Marcus, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Webb nodded slowly. Project Prometheus. It's time. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Project Prometheus had been humanity's deepest secret, a theoretical weapons program that even most council members had only heard whispered about in classified briefings. General Hassan's face was stone. That project was deemed too dangerous for testing, Doctor. The theoretical models suggested it could destabilize local spacetime. And that, Webb said with a cold smile, is exactly why it might work. Meanwhile, aboard the Kethran flagship Dominion of Stars, Hegemon Prime Vorthak reviewed the primitive world before him with mild interest. The third planet from this small yellow star was pleasantly blue and green, with abundant water and what appeared to be a thriving ecosystem. The indigenous species had achieved basic spaceflight and rudimentary energy manipulation, making them suitable for integration into the hegemony's labor force. Vorthak's 4 eyes studied the readouts from his science cast. The humans, as they called themselves, had approximately 8 billion individuals scattered across their world. Their technology was laughably primitive, they still used chemical propulsion for most of their spacecraft and had barely begun to harness fusion energy. Their weapons were crude projectile systems and early-generation energy weapons that couldn't penetrate even the lightest Kethran shielding. Status report, Science Master Quell, Vortak commanded, his telepathic voice echoing in the minds of his subordinates. Quell, a smaller Kethran with 6 arms and specialized sensor organs, responded immediately. Hegemon Prime, the species shows signs of basic intelligence and adaptability. They have already begun mobilizing their primitive military forces, though these pose no threat to our vessels. Their industrial capacity is adequate for mining and manufacturing operations once they are properly subjugated. Vortak's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. This conquest would be swift and profitable. The Kethran Empire had expanded across 47 star systems using the same formula: arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superiority, accept surrender, and integrate the new species into their vast interstellar labor network. The humans would simply be species number 48. Any signs of advanced technology we should be concerned about? Vortak asked. None, Hegemon Prime. Their most advanced vessels appear to be fusion-powered craft with basic energy shielding. They possess nuclear weapons, but these are planet-bound and could not threaten our fleet even if deployed. We have detected some quantum research facilities, but nothing approaching true quantum manipulation. Vortak settled back in his command throne. The humans would likely surrender within the first day once they realized the futility of resistance. If not, a demonstration on one of their major population centers would convince them quickly enough. Back on Earth, Dr. Webb stood in the deepest level of the Cheyenne Mountain complex, surrounded by humanity's greatest scientific minds. Before them lay Project Prometheus, a device that looked deceptively simple for something that had consumed 12 years of research and nearly $1 trillion in funding. The Prometheus device was roughly the size of a shipping container, its surface covered in a maze of quantum field generators and exotic matter containment units. At its core was humanity's greatest scientific achievement and most terrible weapon, a controlled zero-point energy cascade generator. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb addressed the assembled team. What we're about to attempt has never been tested at full scale. The mathematical models suggest it will work, but we're essentially betting the survival of our species on theoretical physics. Dr. Park ran her hands over the device's control systems. Marcus, even if this works, we're talking about weaponizing the fundamental forces of reality itself. The ethical implications are irrelevant, Webb cut her off. The Kethrans have made it clear that our only choices are slavery or extinction. I choose neither. The Prometheus device worked on a principle that human scientists had only recently discovered: the zero-point energy field that permeated all of spacetime could be destabilized in a controlled cascade reaction. The result would be a temporary bubble of space where the laws of physics themselves became unreliable. Matter could spontaneously convert to energy, time could flow backward, and causality itself might break down. It was, essentially, a weapon that could make reality itself malfunction. How do we deploy it? Asked Colonel Martinez, the military liaison for the project. Webb smiled grimly. The beauty of the Prometheus device is that it doesn't need to be deployed in any conventional sense. We can trigger the cascade from here on Earth, and the effect will propagate through quantum entanglement to any point we choose within approximately 1 light-hour of the trigger location. You're talking about targeting their entire fleet simultaneously, Dr. Park realized. Exactly. The Kethrans think they understand the universe better than we do. They've mastered matter manipulation and quantum field control. But they've done so within the framework of stable spacetime. What happens when spacetime itself becomes unstable around them is something even their advanced science can't predict. The team worked frantically for the next 60 hours, calibrating the device and running final calculations. The Kethran fleet had moved closer to Earth, taking position just outside the orbit of Mars. Their ultimatum would expire in 12 hours. As Webb made final adjustments to the targeting system, General Hassan approached him. Doctor, are you absolutely certain about this? If the cascade effect spreads beyond the intended area. Webb paused in his work. General, the worst-case scenario is that we accidentally destabilize spacetime throughout the entire solar system, effectively destroying ourselves along with the Kethrans. The best-case scenario is that we somehow survive this encounter and learn that the universe is far stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined. He looked up at her with eyes that had seen too many theoretical models of human extinction. But, if we do nothing, we become slaves to alien overlords who view us as nothing more than intelligent livestock. I'd rather die free than live in chains. Hassan nodded grimly. Then, God help us all, Doctor. Initiate the sequence. As Webb's hand moved toward the activation switch, neither he nor anyone else on Earth could have predicted what was about to unfold. The Kethran hegemony had indeed underestimated humanity, but not in the way they imagined. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might, it was their absolute refusal to accept defeat, even in the face of impossible odds. The activation sequence began, and, across the solar system, the very fabric of reality prepared to become humanity's weapon. #Reality's Edge. The Prometheus device hummed to life with a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, the greatest minds of humanity watched as their most desperate gamble began to unfold. On the main display, quantum field readings spiked beyond anything previously recorded as the zero-point cascade propagated outward through dimensions that had no names. Dr. Webb's fingers danced across the control interface, his face bathed in the eerie blue glow of exotic energy readings. Cascade propagation at 97% efficiency, he announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Quantum entanglement locks established. Target area, Kethran Fleet Formation, coordinates locked. Aboard the Dominion of Stars, Hegemon Prime Vorthak was reviewing the surrender protocols his species would implement once the humans inevitably capitulated. The deadline was now only hours away, and his sensors showed no movement from the human fleet. Their primitive vessels remained clustered around their homeworld like frightened animals seeking shelter. Hegemon Prime, Science Master Quell's telepathic voice carried a note of confusion. We're detecting unusual quantum fluctuations emanating from the third planet. The readings are unprecedented. Vorthak's primary eyes focused on the sensor data. Elaborate, Science Master. The fluctuations appear to be artificial in origin, but they're unlike any technology in our databases. The quantum field density is increasing exponentially, and the pattern suggests some form of cascade reaction. However, this should be impossible with the human's primitive understanding of physics. Before Vorthak could respond, reality around the Kethran fleet began to unravel. The first sign was subtle, a slight shimmer in the void of space, as if the universe itself was developing a crack. Then, the shimmer spread, racing outward from an invisible point in space directly toward the Kethran formation. The cascade field struck the lead vessels of the fleet like a wave of impossibility. Captain Thex of the cruiser Star Render was the first to experience the effects. One moment he was reviewing battle formations on his command console, the next moment the console began to exist in several different states simultaneously. The holographic display showed his ship in multiple configurations, damaged, undamaged, and, strangely, as if it had never been built at all. All stations report. Thex commanded, but his voice emerged as both sound waves and visible light, creating a cascade of rainbow patterns that painted themselves across the walls of his bridge. His sensors officer, a young Kethran named Vel, stared at her instruments in growing horror. Captain, space itself is becoming unstable. Matter in sections 7 through 12 is spontaneously converting to energy, but the energy is also somehow remaining as matter. Time dilation readings are showing negative values, time is flowing backward in some areas of the ship. Throughout the Kethran fleet, impossible things began to happen. On the battleship Void Crusher, the artificial gravity systems began pulling in multiple directions simultaneously, creating pockets of space where crew members fell upward, downward, and sideways all at once. The ship's quantum manipulators, the pride of Kethran technology, began working in reverse, turning energy back into matter in random configurations. Hegemon Prime Vorthak's flagship experienced perhaps the most disturbing effects. The ship's advanced AI, a quantum consciousness that had served the Kethran military for 3 centuries, began experiencing temporal echoes of its own existence. Past, present, and future versions of the AI's consciousness began interacting with each other, creating logical paradoxes that threatened to tear the ship's computer systems apart. Hegemon Prime, the AI's voice now came from speakers that existed in several temporal states. I am experiencing memories of events that have not yet occurred. I remember being destroyed, I remember never being created, and I remember existing in a universe where the laws of physics are completely different. Vorthak's 4 eyes widened in a combination of fear and fury. Science Master Quell. What is happening to my fleet? But Quell was no longer capable of coherent response. The Science Master's 6 arms were moving independently through different time streams. One arm was reaching for controls that existed 5 minutes in the past, while another was operating instruments that wouldn't be invented for another hour. His consciousness was scattered across multiple temporal states, experiencing his entire lifespan simultaneously. Back on Earth, the effects of the Prometheus cascade were being monitored with a mixture of triumph and terror. The zero-point field destabilization was working exactly as the theoretical models had predicted, but seeing it in practice was far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. "My God," Dr. Park whispered as she watched the sensor readings from the Kethran fleet. "We're not just attacking their ships. We're attacking the fundamental structure of reality around them." Dr. Webb nodded grimly. "The Kethrans have spent millennia learning to manipulate matter and energy within the framework of stable spacetime. But their entire understanding of physics becomes useless when spacetime itself becomes unreliable." On the main display, they could see the Kethran fleet struggling to maintain formation as their ships began to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Some vessels appeared to be fighting battles that had happened in the past, while others were responding to threats that wouldn't exist for several minutes. General Hassan studied the tactical display with professional interest. "Doctor, how long can we maintain the cascade?" "Theoretically, the effect should be self-sustaining for approximately 6 hours, Webb replied. "The zero-point field destabilization creates a feedback loop that maintains the quantum uncertainty throughout the affected area. However, there's a risk that..." His words were cut off as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The Prometheus device itself was beginning to show signs of temporal distortion. Parts of the massive machine were aging rapidly while other sections appeared to be reverting to their state before construction. "The cascade is affecting our equipment," Dr. Park shouted over the alarms. "We're inside the quantum uncertainty field." Webb's hands flew over the controls as he attempted to stabilize their local spacetime. "It's propagating back along the quantum entanglement channels. The device is creating a temporal echo effect." For a terrifying moment, it seemed that humanity's desperate gamble might consume them as well. The walls of the underground facility began to show stress fractures that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. Equipment throughout the base began operating according to the laws of physics from different eras, some following classical mechanics, others obeying relativistic principles, and a few operating under physical laws that hadn't been discovered yet. But then, Webb did something that would later be recognized as the moment that proved human ingenuity could triumph over impossible odds. Instead of trying to stop the cascade feedback, he redirected it. "If we can't prevent the temporal echoes," he muttered as his fingers danced across quantum field controls, "then we'll use them as a focusing mechanism." He reconfigured the Prometheus device to create a controlled temporal loop around Earth itself. Instead of allowing the cascade to randomly affect their local spacetime, he shaped it into a protective barrier. The zero-point destabilization became a shield that prevented the cascade effects from reaching Earth while amplifying the chaos around the Kethran fleet. The result was spectacular and terrible to behold. The area of space around Mars became a quantum storm of impossible physics. Kethran ships found themselves fighting their own past and future selves as temporal echoes created multiple versions of the same vessels. Matter spontaneously converted to energy and, then, back to matter in different configurations. Some ships aged centuries in minutes, while others reverted to the raw materials from which they had been constructed. Hegemon Prime Vorthak, desperately trying to maintain control of his flagship as it existed in 17 different quantum states simultaneously, finally, understood what had happened. The humans hadn't simply attacked his fleet with an advanced weapon, they had weaponized uncertainty itself. "All ships," he broadcast on every channel, though his words emerged as both electromagnetic radiation and gravitational waves. "Emergency withdrawal. The humans have destabilized local spacetime. This is not conventional warfare." But withdrawal was impossible. The Kethran ship's quantum drives, designed to manipulate space for faster-than-light travel, were unable to function in an area where space itself was unreliable. Some vessels found that their navigation systems were plotting courses through dimensions that existed only in mathematical theory. Others discovered that their engines were simultaneously propelling them forward and backward through time. The cruiser Star Render attempted to activate its emergency quantum tunnel generator, only to discover that the tunnel opened into a pocket of space where the ship already existed. Captain Thex found himself face to face with 17 different versions of himself, each from slightly different quantum states, all trying to give orders to the same crew. Throughout the fleet, Kethran soldiers and officers struggled to comprehend what was happening to them. Their advanced training had prepared them for conventional warfare, space battles, and even conflict with other quantum-manipulating species. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for a war against the fundamental laws of physics themselves. On the battleship Void Crusher, Commander Zeke watched in horror as her weapons systems began firing at targets that existed in parallel universes. The ship's quantum cannons, capable of deleting matter from existence, were instead creating matter from nothing as the cascade field inverted their basic functions. Each shot created new forms of exotic matter that obeyed physical laws that had never existed before. Some Kethran vessels simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. The destroyer Swift Death became a probability cloud, existing simultaneously in every possible configuration it could have been built in. Its crew found themselves scattered across multiple realities, some where they were still warriors, others where they had never joined the military, and a few where they existed as entirely different species. As the hours passed, the cascade effect began to stabilize into a new kind of equilibrium. The area around the Kethran fleet became a permanent zone of quantum uncertainty, where the laws of physics were more like suggestions than absolute rules. Any attempt to enter or leave the affected region resulted in immediate temporal and spatial displacement. Dr. Webb monitored the readings with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. The cascade has reached stable equilibrium, he reported to the assembled leadership. The Kethran fleet is effectively trapped in a pocket of unstable spacetime. They're not destroyed, exactly, but they're no longer capable of functioning as a coherent military force. President Vasquez studied the tactical display showing the chaotic mess that had once been the most advanced fleet in known space. Doctor, what exactly have we done to them? Webb considered the question carefully. We've proven that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, they can never be more advanced than the universe itself. The Kethrans mastered every known law of physics, but we just showed them that there are aspects of reality that can't be mastered, only survived. As reports continued to stream in from long-range sensors, it became clear that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had taken the most technologically advanced military force ever assembled and rendered it completely helpless without destroying a single ship through conventional means. But, as Dr. Webb would soon discover, their victory had consequences that extended far beyond the defeat of a single alien fleet. The cascade effect had been detected by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, and the implications of humanity's new weapon were beginning to ripple across civilized space. The Kethran hegemony's other fleets were mobilizing, but so were other powers who had heard whispers of a young species that could weaponize reality itself. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, and the galaxy was taking notice. #The Wrath unleashed 6 months after the Battle of Mars, as historians would later name it, the galaxy was a very different place. The quantum storm that surrounded the remnants of the Kethran fleet had become a permanent fixture of the Sol system, visible to long-range sensors across dozens of star systems. What had once been the pride of the Kethran military was now a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power throughout civilized space. Ambassador Zara Chen, Dr. Webb's daughter and humanity's first representative to the Galactic Confederation, stood before an assembly that included delegates from 43 different species. The vast chamber on the neutral world of Kepler Station hummed with translator fields and atmospheric processors designed to accommodate the diverse biological needs of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of first contact protocols, diplomatic overtures, and carefully worded threats disguised as trade negotiations. The moment humanity had demonstrated the ability to weaponize reality itself, every major power in the galaxy had suddenly become very interested in establishing formal relations with the young species from Sol 3. Esteemed delegates, Zara began, her voice carrying clearly through the universal translation system, I come before you today not as a representative of a primitive species seeking membership in your confederation, but as the voice of humanity, a species that has proven it will not tolerate subjugation under any circumstances. In the audience, she could see representatives from dozens of civilizations, each more advanced than humanity by centuries or millennia. The crystalline Nexari, who had mastered energy manipulation to such a degree that they existed as pure consciousness within artificial bodies. The hive-minded Collectari, whose individual drones shared a distributed intelligence across thousands of worlds. The ancient Proteans, who had been manipulating genetics and evolution when most species were still learning to make fire. And, scattered throughout the assembly were empty seats, representatives from the Kethran hegemony who would never again attend these sessions. The news from Kethran space had been trickling in for months, each report more devastating than the last. The hegemony, once the galaxy's dominant military power, was collapsing from within. Their remaining fleets, learning of the fate of their invincible armada at Sol, had begun to question orders. Subjugated species throughout Kethran space had risen in rebellion, emboldened by the knowledge that their oppressors could be defeated. Chancellor Vex of the Nexari Collective leaned forward, his crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns that served as their equivalent of facial expressions. Ambassador Chen, your species' actions at Sol have had consequences throughout the galaxy. The balance of power that has maintained peace for 8,000 years has been fundamentally altered. Zarai nodded calmly. Chancellor, with respect, that balance of power was built on the assumption that technological superiority guaranteed victory. Humanity has proven that assumption false. You weaponized spacetime itself. The outburst came from General Korvash of the Military Empire, a species known for their aggressive expansion policies. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? There are dozens of younger species now attempting to recreate your cascade technology. Before Zara could respond, the chamber's emergency communication system activated. The massive holographic display at the center of the room lit up with an urgent transmission from the frontier sectors of the galaxy. The image that appeared was chaos given form. A star system on the edge of Collectari space was experiencing what could only be described as a reality storm. Multiple versions of the same planets existed simultaneously, while the local star flickered between different stages of stellar evolution. Ships attempting to enter the system found themselves scattered across several dimensions, some emerging as antimatter versions of themselves. This is the 7th such incident this month, reported Science Director Tal of the Collectari. These are the results of failed attempts to recreate human cascade technology. 3 civilizations have already rendered entire star systems uninhabitable in their efforts to develop weapons similar to yours. The assembled delegates turned to stare at Zara with expressions that ranged from accusation to outright fear. The human ambassador felt the weight of their attention and realized that this moment would determine not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but possibly the fate of galactic civilization itself. Esteemed delegates, she said quietly, perhaps it's time you learned the full truth about what happened at Sol. She activated her personal data pad, and the chamber's display shifted to show detailed sensor logs from the Battle of Mars. But, instead of the sanitized version that had been circulating through galactic intelligence networks, this showed the complete picture, including humanity's own near destruction during the cascade feedback. What you're seeing is not the controlled demonstration of superior technology, Zara explained as the delegates watched footage of the Prometheus device nearly tearing apart the facility around it. This is desperate people doing something incredibly dangerous because the alternative was slavery or extinction. The display showed Dr. Webb's frantic efforts to prevent the cascade from consuming Earth itself, the moments when it seemed humanity might destroy themselves along with their attackers. It showed human scientists working with equations they barely understood, taking risks that no sane civilization would ever consider acceptable. We didn't master the universe, Zara continued. We just proved that we were willing to break it rather than submit to conquest. And that willingness, delegates, is not something that can be replicated through technology alone. In the weeks that followed, the galactic response to humanity's revelation was swift and decisive. The major powers realized that the cascade technology, while devastating, was not something that could be safely developed or deployed by any rational civilization. The attempts by other species to recreate it had already demonstrated the catastrophic risks involved. But they had also realized something far more important: humanity represented something new in galactic politics. Here was a species that would rather destroy themselves and their enemies than accept defeat. It was a form of warfare that had no place in civilized conflict, where rational actors made calculated decisions based on cost-benefit analysis. The Nexari Collective was the first to offer a formal alliance. Their message, delivered through quantum entanglement communication, was both respectful and wary. We propose a partnership between our species, based on mutual respect and the understanding that humanity's unique perspective on conflict resolution makes traditional conquest impossible. The Protean Empire followed suit, offering technological exchanges and territorial concessions that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Species that had never acknowledged the existence of younger civilizations suddenly found themselves eager to establish diplomatic relations with the humans from Sol 3. But it was the fate of the Kethran hegemony that truly demonstrated the scope of humanity's impact on the galaxy. Within a year of the Battle of Mars, the once mighty empire had collapsed entirely. Their remaining fleets, demoralized by the knowledge that their most advanced technology was useless against an enemy willing to weaponize impossibility itself, had either surrendered to rebel forces or simply disbanded. Former hegemon Prime Vorthak, rescued from the quantum storm around Mars by a joint human Nexari expedition, spent his remaining days in a rehabilitation center on Kepler Station. The experience of existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously had left him with a unique perspective on reality, and a profound respect for the species that had engineered his defeat. "They didn't just beat us," he told his caretakers in one of his more lucid moments. "They showed us that our entire understanding of warfare was based on false assumptions. We thought that superior technology guaranteed victory, but the humans proved that the most powerful weapon in the universe is the willingness to use it, regardless of the consequences." Dr. Webb, now serving as Earth's Director of Strategic Sciences, stood in his new laboratory overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The facility was jointly operated by human scientists and their new alien partners, working together to understand the implications of Cascade technology. But Webb's real focus was on a different kind of research entirely. "We've proven that we can break the universe," he said to his assistant, Dr. Park, as they reviewed the latest reports from across the galaxy. "Now we need to prove that we can fix it too." The project they were working on was perhaps even more ambitious than the original Prometheus device. Instead of weaponizing quantum uncertainty, they were attempting to develop technology that could repair the damage caused by cascade events. The quantum storms scattered across the galaxy needed to be cleaned up, and humanity had accepted responsibility for developing the means to do so. "The Nexari are contributing their energy manipulation expertise," Dr. Park reported. "The Proteans are providing biological processing components that can exist in unstable spacetime. Even some of the former Kethran worlds are offering assistance with quantum field mathematics." Webb nodded with satisfaction. "Good. If we're going to be known as the species that can break reality, we might as well also be known as the species that can fix it." The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity had gained its place in galactic civilization not through superior technology or diplomatic finesse, but by demonstrating a willingness to destroy everything rather than accept defeat. It was a reputation that opened doors and commanded respect, but it also came with responsibilities that weighed heavily on every human leader. President Vasquez, now serving her second term and widely regarded as one of the most influential leaders in galactic politics, often reflected on the strange path humanity had taken to the stars. In her private moments, she wondered what their future would hold. They had proven that technological superiority didn't guarantee victory, but they had also shown the galaxy a form of warfare that no civilized species wanted to contemplate. "We become the galaxy's insurance policy against tyranny," she told her advisors during one of their weekly strategy sessions. "Every would-be conqueror now has to ask themselves, are they willing to risk facing an enemy that might choose mutual annihilation over surrender?" The question had fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout civilized space. Wars that might once have been fought for decades were now resolved through negotiation, because the specter of cascade warfare made total victory too risky to pursue. The mere possibility that a desperate species might choose to weaponize reality itself had made traditional conquest strategies obsolete. 5 years after first contact, humanity had established colonies on 17 worlds and maintained embassies with 34 different civilizations. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers on projects that pushed the boundaries of known science. Human philosophers debated ethics with minds that had contemplated existence for millennia longer than their species had even existed. But, perhaps most importantly, humanity had learned to temper their reputation for desperate measures with wisdom and restraint. The Cascade technology remained classified at the highest levels, known only to a handful of scientists and leaders who understood both its power and its terrible responsibility. Dr. Webb, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, often visited the monument that had been erected at the site of the original Prometheus facility. The inscription, written in both human languages and galactic standard script, read simply, "To those who choose freedom over safety, uncertainty over oppression, and hope over fear." As he stood before the memorial on the anniversary of the Battle of Mars, Webb reflected on humanity's journey from a primitive species facing extinction to one of the most respected and feared civilizations in the galaxy. They had achieved their freedom not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their Cascade technology or their willingness to use it. It was their absolute conviction that some things, freedom, dignity, the right to determine their own destiny, were worth any risk to defend. And, in a universe full of ancient civilizations that had grown comfortable with the predictable patterns of power and politics, that conviction had proven to be the most dangerous force of all. The Kethran hegemony had called themselves Alpha, the dominant power that others naturally followed. But they had learned, too late, that true strength doesn't come from the ability to dominate others. It comes from the willingness to risk everything for what you believe in. Humanity had taught the galaxy that lesson in the most dramatic way possible. And the galaxy, despite its initial fear and resistance, had ultimately become a better place for having learned it.